All right, let's get started. Hello, everyone. This is John Feingold with the Race Class Podcast. I have another special guest for a conversation today. I'm here with Julius Nam, the recent, though no longer, head of the Community Relations Service, a little-known agency within the Department of Justice, and a very long-time friend. And so it's really wonderful to see you, Julius, to have you here today. And so yeah, let's just jump into things. We have a lot to talk about. So you're the former head of a DOJ agency called the Community Relations Service, unless I got that wrong, CRS. And we're going to spend a lot of our time talking about that. But you traveled a long road to get into this role. And so I'm hoping you could start us off, just in a couple minutes, tell us a little bit more about you and your path and yeah, how you landed in this DOJ agency.
It's great to join you, John. And we have indeed had a long friendship over the past decade and a half and more, and counting, and going
We
back
are
to our
getting
time.
old.
Yes, going back to our time at UCLA Law School where we first met. I think at some point in our first year, I think early in our 1L year, we met, and we've had uh, many fruitful, interesting, rewarding conversations. And it's just been wonderful also to get to listen to you from time to time as you've continued to share with me gratefully your race class podcast, and it's so great to join you today. So how I got to CRS was from within the Department of Justice. I started as a prosecutor in Los Angeles in 2015, and for about 8 years, that was my identity as a prosecutor in DOJ. But beginning January of 2024, I was initially tentatively or temporarily reassigned as part of what's called a detail to CRS to join the administrative functions of that office as an acting deputy director. So I spent 2024 in the last year of the Biden administration doing administrative work for CRS, overseeing the headquarters management, but also doing some work with the field offices. At that time, we had between 20 and 25 or so field offices in 2024. And the primary work of CRS, as we'll talk about further, is doing conflict resolution in civil rights space. And so it was from 2024 that I've been involved with CRS.
Thanks. And we'll spend much more time talking about CRS. I actually going to ask you to go back even further in your own, professional and personal arc. So as you mentioned, we met about 16 years ago, I think, in our first
Thereabouts.
year at UCLA. Most law students at most have worked for a couple years doing different sorts of things. But you were, I think it's fair to say, in your second career when you entered law school. And if that's not fair to say, check me. But I'd love for just so folks can, know you a little bit better. What were you up to before law school?
Yeah, it was arguably my third career. So that was the year 2009 when we first started law school, and we met at some point during that first semester. Uh, I think I was the oldest person in our class. I know that because during our convocation ceremony, the first day we got there, We were in, I think, Royce Hall, the big auditorium on UCLA campus, and the dean of the law school was giving a profile description of the 1L class, and he says something like, "We have an 18-year-old, woo, that we have a genius among us, all the way to 40 years old." And I turned to the person next to me and said, "Oh shit, I'm the old guy." uh, those literally were my words. Excuse my inappropriate language. Made even more inappropriate because I used to be a pastor, a Christian pastor, working for about 9 years in ministry, and then I switched over to within the field of religion, religious academia. I have a PhD in Christian history, focusing on American religious history in the 19th and 20th centuries. And so I did about 6 years of full-time teaching before I went to law school. So altogether, I had about 15 years in the religious field.
And yeah, so maybe the oldest, certainly the wisest member of the class, and definitely one of the hardest working, given that you spent a lot of late nights in the law review office. So, thanks for being here. It's really nice to see you. And one question that I ask everyone who comes on the Race Class podcast is the following. Where was your racial education? And I always mean this as an open-ended question that's designed to invite reflection on where, how, when you started thinking about race and racism. And so for you, I would just love to hear how you respond to this question.
Yeah, I think of three different times in my formation and growth where I can identify racial education for myself. The first is coming to America. I came as a 14-year-old from South Korea to southwestern Michigan, a very small town, and I was there as a child of a doctoral student who my father had come to study theology at a seminary there. And so our family of five, I'm the oldest of three boys, came as a 14-year-old, as a ninth grader. And uh, I was certainly the only Korean and one of maybe a couple Asian students in a school that was largely white. And race was something that I had not really processed. Racial consciousness was something that I had not really been thinking about. I knew, of course, that I was Korean, but I didn't quite realize that I was Asian until I came to the United States because those who live in Korea, at least at that time, did not think of themselves as being Asian. Asia is more of a geographical uh, term rather than a racial identification term. And so I learned that, okay, I was also Asian. So what does that mean? What do I have in common with others who supposedly came from or were born to those who came from parts of Asia? So there was no formal racial education as such, but understanding as a like a small minority member who was also learning English at that time. There were things that were just assumed, defaulted within that southwestern Michigan, predominantly white culture that I was be assimilating into, so to speak. I recognize my otherness very much so, and especially because I came as a child of a foreign student who was international student who was to return to Korea, and I didn't come here to live here permanently, as it turned out. So the otherness was both acknowledged as someone who was here on a particular time in our lives, but also it was certainly reinforced by the proverbial questions that Asian Americans, Korean Americans often get is where are you from? When are you going back? Where did you learn English? Even coming from a friendly place, that sort of reinforced my otherness and the increasing awareness of uh, how or questions regarding how do I fit into the American society as I was becoming more quote Americanized. Um, the second phase I would refer to would be the time when I started working as a minister. And I spent actually some time in Korea, but I came back here to do my own doctoral studies, and I started working as a pastor, and it was at a Korean American church. But we all spoke English fluently, and my audience, my congregation was the youth that was very much American in its full sense of the word, and yet we were self-segregating, so to speak, in a Korean church. So, what is our relationship with the community? What is our responsibility as a people of faith, but also people of color, Korean American, Asian American, and so I uh, I became convinced that if one is a person who tries to follow the gospel of Jesus Christ, there ought to be a commitment to connection and relationship, regardless of what the color, ethnicity, or culture might be. Those who surround us. At the same time, there is responsibility to be authentic to who we are, and that tension is always there as Christians often group themselves in along ethnic lines, for rightly or wrongly. That is a reality of today's Christianity in America. And so, what is that relationship? I struggle with that quite a bit, and uh, but I didn't really have any resolution of that. In a sense, I still don't. But the third phase was going to law school, and being part of the public interest community there, being part of the uh, CRS, the first CRS that I learned about, which is the Critical Race Studies program. And although we'll get to the other CRS that I'm here to chat with you about, Community Relations Service, but being part of the CRS community there, I didn't really formally go through the program, but I was certainly hanging around those like you who were uh, studying CRS more intentionally, more formally with many of our beloved professors. And I think it's there that I learn more deeply and formally as to how the language of race and the categories of within the field of law, the categories of thinking about what seem like non-racial issues, but nonetheless uh, uh, race and ethnicity and these categories are infused in what appears to be non-racial categories. So there was a lot of learning in terms of language and categories that I received at UCLA.
So, thank you. Uh, are you, and so I wasn't planning to ask this, but I'm going to. Are you in touch with the church communities that you ministered at all these days? Because I guess just given the moment we're in, given the really violent assault on immigrant communities, on communities of color, on certain faith communities, I'm just wondering, how you are experiencing, processing this, and then also just whether you're in touch with folks, maybe in other parts of the country who are having to navigate this really perilous moment, if you don't mind.
That's a loaded question because I call myself a recovering pastor. It's a term that I borrowed from a friend who also is a recovering pastor. Uh, yes and no. Yes, in touch with I have many friends who are theologians, philosophers, pastors. I'm near daily in touch with them because of our friendship, and we discuss oftentimes uh, issues connected to theology and church and what congregations are experiencing. At the same time, there are many aspects of my life where I, have to just honestly, authentically say I've sort of become post-Christian in a sense, in terms of certain choices that I make in my life and in terms of how I uh, uh, engage in spiritual religious practice. So I'm I feel like I'm caught in between at times, which is not entirely new to me because the moment I came to the United States, I've always felt like I was caught in between, and the in betweenness and the continuing sense of otherness and marginalization is something that I've sort of understood and embraced as just part of who I am.
Thanks. I appreciate you sharing. And I think many of us in different ways are often caught in um, different sorts of in-betweenness, especially as we are, you know, evolving, growing ourselves, and maybe in different places now than we were at another point. And it's a more sort of playful, lighthearted memory that I had when you were describing being part of the public interest program and sort of hanger outer with the critical race studies folks at UCLA is a confession, which for any student who listens to this, maybe they'll hold this over my head. So you and I both we did not enter UCLA formally part of the public interest program, if I remember correctly, but
Right.
you did the work of filling out the application, I think during our first year to formally enroll in the program. And I had two opportunities to do that, both applying to UCLA and then when you did. And in both instances, I just did not put in the effort to complete the application to, enter this particular institutional space that I think I would have felt quite at home in. And part of it is a story of the CRS program really just in a sense providing everything I could have asked for. But on the other hand, I have to give you credit for, putting in the effort to enter the program.
Well, I don't know if that really uh, merits any kind of credit. I did apply into the program for my second and third years. At the same time, I could have also pursued the critical race studies program by completing all the requirements, which I did not.
Oh,
But
that
you
is
did.
true. That
You
I
did.
did. I did. I did. All right, so let's pivot a little bit to the other CRS, the Community Relations Service. And I was gonna push you on being a prosecutor and just ask about it because I think you've probably my guess is that coming out of a public interest program, you've likely encountered a lot of skepticism going the prosecutor route. And I think there's actually like an important conversation to have there that if we have time, maybe sort of we'll get into it or sort of invite it in. But I want to turn to CRS because the first time I saw you write about the DOJ CRS, I was very confused. I thought you were talking about the UCLA CRS and nothing made sense. And also the DOJ, historically at least, does not strike me as a site of remediation and mediation and healing. But that's sort of how I now understand CRS's role. And so I was hoping you could just give us a little explainer on CRS. What is it? When was it created? What is its purpose? Just so folks know this agency that now, as we'll get to shortly, is one of the casualties of the Trump administration's assault on the federal administration.
CRS was born in 1964 as part of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The Civil Rights Act of that year is what many consider to be the most important piece of legislation passed in the 20th century. I certainly think so. Hidden, well, not intended to be hidden, but hidden in the sense that folks don't always get to the 10th title of that law, Title 10 of the Civil Rights Act, establishes the Community Relations Service. And the reason for that creation was to provide mediation and conflict resolution services in service of uh, advancing the goals of the Civil Rights Act. That is, in public accommodation space, in voting space, in federal program space, in employment space, that prosecution or enforcement or investigation was only going to get so far in terms of achieving the goals, which is having a society that does not engage in discrimination over race, color, national origin, or sex, or religion, depending on which title we're talking about. But there was a felt need by JFK and LBJ who really pushed this law, uh, ultimately signed by President Johnson, that there is a need for a federal agency that comes with a neutral, impartial stance into communities and through power of persuasion and dialogue and conciliation, uh, bringing people together into ultimately moving in the direction of having less discriminating, more fair, more embracing kind of society in these spaces. So that's how CRS came about in 1964, immediately the next year in Selma, uh, after the initial attempt by the marchers to get to Montgomery was stopped at the Pettus Bridge. CRS conciliators was on hand, working between the protesters and the local law enforcement authorities to help come up with a plan that ultimately allowed the marchers to go to Montgomery. CRS is not going to take all the credit for it, of course, but there was that was the very significant moment in CRS's history where we showed what the intended function of the service was, which is to provide a trusted uh, intermediary to mediate and find a way toward an equitable resolution. I'm also happy to talk about my prosecutorials and having you, my friend, take me to task, which is going to be, I think, perhaps interesting and helpful conversation in the broader context of why CRS is in DOJ and what it does in connection with prosecutors. Just as an additional historical footnote, CRS was placed in the Commerce Department
Hmm.
because so much of Civil Rights Act has to do with the commerce-based public
Hmm.
accommodation. And so the original thinking was that will be better situated in the Commerce Department. But in 1966, through the reorganization plan submitted by LBJ, it was moved to DOJ to work more closely with the Civil Rights Division out of the recognition that uh, that is a better match. And so since 66, CRS has been in DOJ, of course, until we were disbanded in October of
And
2025.
yeah, until you were disbanded about a month and a half ago. And I will, it's really helpful for you to share that history to ground us in the origin story of CRS. On the same day that the Trump DOJ announced a quote unquote final rule, and I'll just footnote that it doesn't seem like the rulemaking process was um, actually followed, but in a press release, in a rule that was promulgated, the Trump administration is attempting to eliminate disparate impact from all of the civil rights regulations or from all the agencies that enforce civil rights law and disparate impact in a way not dissimilar from CRS is, I think, modestly put a sort of baseline mechanism to or tool to find ways to remedy racial inequality or to move closer to racial equality. And so for anyone um, Yeah, for anyone who is, in any way aware of what the Trump administration's orientation to civil rights is, it's sort of, I don't know, for me, it makes sense that the same regime that is both disparaging and eliminating disparate impact is going to is dismantling an agency whose job is to go beyond what anti-discrimination law itself is able to do. And so, yeah, I guess I'll just put it to you though. You work in this agency. I just, you know, talk and write and do stuff. But um, why? Am I right that Trump administration went after CRS because CRS, is actually meant to promote civil rights? Is there something more to this story? I don't know. What's going on?
So far, the reason that the Trump administration and the current DOJ administration gave the, for eliminating CRS as an agency is just a single line in a fairly obscure budget document that CRS's mission does not comport with the administration's and DOJ's priorities. Uh, that sort of a statement invites a lot of questions and a need for explanation as to what that means. How is it that you're finding that CRS's mission, which is baked into the Civil Rights Act, congressionally established, reaffirmed every year through funding, and further empowered by other laws to heighten the uh, work that CRS was established to do since 1964, all of that was wiped away in terms of agency and its mission by saying that it does not comport with DOJ's priorities. So that's the only thing in terms of formal administration language that I can point to. And I think that's part of the problem that this administration, not only with regard to CRS, but many other agencies, the administration has eliminated, abolished, drastically reduced their work, many of these agencies were established by law. Nonetheless, through these just sweeping single sentence, sometimes no sentence justification, and just outright eliminating them. That was certainly the experience of CRS this year.
So I think in a moment I'll ask you to say a little bit more about how the Trump administration has gone about dismantling CRS. I'm just wondering if you could give us some concrete examples of ways that CRS, the Community Relations Service, has intervened, just so people have a more just tangible sense of the work that this agency did.
CRS for a long time has seen itself as fulfilling four different major services. Uh, and these are ways that we have interpreted the word conciliation in the statute, or bringing about peaceful relations. So how does that actually work? Because the statute doesn't say, okay, this is how you are supposed to be fulfilling this. That is being delegated to the department and the agency to figure out how to bring about peaceful relations and how to bring about conciliation. So the four ways that we have been fulfilling the statutory mandate of conciliation and bringing about peaceful relations is through one, facilitation of dialogues; two, through formal mediation; three, through training, education; and four, through consultation. So I'll give just one quick example of each,
Yeah.
without spending too much time. So facilitation of dialogue is something that, for example, in the school setting, there's racial or anti-LGBT type bullying, and we're talking about, say, junior high students. And so when there's a problem such as that, we get alerted either by the school because the problem is severe, or by parents or members of the community, sometimes students. They reach out to us, alert us to this cultural problem there is about bullying, and they invite us to hold dialogues. And we have a formal program for such a dialogue called School Spirit, where after much planning, we come and serve as facilitators of dialogue for students to voice their concerns among themselves as to what the school is doing or not doing, what the parents are doing, not doing, how the community is responding, as a way of reaching a common understanding of the way forward to remedy the problem. And so that sort of dialogue happens in the police community setting, where there is unfortunate shooting, tragic shooting, or sometimes in employment context, wherever there's a need for a third party neutral dialogue facilitator to come and have these dialogues with, in good faith, listening to each other and coming up with solutions. When that takes a more formal process, we call that mediation, and that starts with an agreement as to the process, with the goal of ultimately reaching mediation agreement. And we've done that in the post-George Floyd Minneapolis, helping the community members and the local law enforcement come to an understanding, and a memorandum of understanding as to what the community can expect from police officers moving forward and what the department can commit to in a way that the different sides can uh, uh, have with can understand with clarity. So the more formal process of dialogue facilitation is in the form of formal mediation. We also have done a lot of training, and we can talk about this further. But one of the unfortunate things that happened this year was the stoppage of all our engaging with transgender communities program that we have very successfully put on for especially for law enforcement agencies. In fact, until January of this year, engaging with transgender communities program was one of our most popular programs requested by law enforcement agencies, because oftentimes police officers they want to serve everyone equally and with respect and dignity, but they're not always equipped with the right language, understanding of the experience of transgender individuals and other types of communities uh, to really engage in law enforcement in the way they want to because of just lack of understanding. And we've provided such a program to really educate police officers as to uh, what the experience of transgender individuals, persons are. And typically, one of our presenters is a law enforcement officer who is also transgender. So that's really been a successful program. And we've done the same for understanding Muslim communities, Sikh communities. And more recently, we developed the same for Jewish community and Arab community and Hindu community. And so these are ways that we have provided training to communities. And lastly, consultation is based on a very specific issue that oftentimes agencies come to us to provide behind the scenes consultation on how to engage with the community in a way that they can fulfill their mission peacefully. And so that's the technical assistance consultation that we provide. So that's the kind of work that we've done for 61 plus years, or we did until we closed on October 31st, 2025.
All right, so then tell us about that closure story. And so is this a Project 2025 story where, Russ Vought comes in and has, his checklist of, quote unquote woke, quote unquote equity obsessed programs that he's gonna knock out? Yeah, I guess if you could sort of, because what you are describing, I think it could be critiqued in different sorts of ways, as all things can, but in very tangible respects, it seems to be about the goal is about bringing people together, about avoiding violence, about remedy. I don't know if restorative justice is how folks internally think about it, but on the punishment to restorative justice spectrum, it seems certainly closer to restorative justice, which is just all to say it seems anathema, wholly inconsistent with the current federal regime's orientation to community, which is to brutalize and to dominate. And so I guess, yeah, could you tell us a little bit about how we got, so now today we're recording, it's December 9th. You mentioned October 30th was the closure. So you were the leader of this agency over, since inauguration day. So maybe walk us through some of the key moments from January 20th to now, or even before, if it's helpful to have some background as well.
So I'll start from before the Biden years really quickly and then get to some specifics about what happened in 2025. So I mentioned earlier that the only thing that we heard from the administration as to the reason for closing CRS was that our mission does not comport with the priorities of the administration. What does that actually mean? There's been nothing that's been said, but I think we know fairly well, clearly, as to what that means. And that really comes from documents that came out of the Trump world during the Biden years. So you mentioned Mr. Vogt. He's the director of the Office of Management and Budget, a very powerful office within the White House. He, in the latter years of Trump 1, he was the director. And of course, he left government when Joe Biden became president. And during that time, he established a center called nonprofit called Center for Renewing of America. And it is that organization, along with others, that ultimately would produce uh, Project 2025, although formally it was at, I believe, Heritage
Yep.
Foundation. But Mr. Vogt is certainly contributing in significant ways to Project 2025. As a technical matter, CRS is not mentioned in Project 2025. However, there is a document that the Center for Renewing of America published, which is a Model 2023 budget document. And they said, the center said, these are the ways that uh, with the next conservative Republican administration, these are ways we should reorganize the federal government. And within the Justice Department section of that document is a paragraph about CRS, where that document talks about full elimination of what they called equity obsessed and woke and weaponized CRS. They view CRS as driven by race essentialism and radical gender theory, hunting for hate crimes defined through the prism of critical race theory and intersectional progressivism. That's a mouthful there without definition of any of these, but with the assumption that the readers would understand exactly what they mean. And when it comes down to it, they view the work that CRS had been doing, which is engage into conflicts where there are differences on the application of the Civil Rights Act, or how people of different gender identities should relate with each other, how folks with different religious backgrounds should relate with each other and interact with each other. And CRS's mode has been, to the best of our ability, being neutral and impartial, not privileging one voice against others, but certainly uh, creating a forum where those who feel that their voices are not being heard could be heard toward a satisfying resolution for all involved. And in the process, minority voices, voices of those individuals who could not be heard, those voices were heard and had to be acknowledged. And city governments, police departments, universities, federal and state governments had to listen to them and address them because in many times CRS was involved. Here's an arm of the federal DOJ facilitating the conversation. Although we were not enforcing anything or requiring anything of anybody because all our engagements were voluntary, our presence did make a difference in terms of the previously unheard and suppressed voices and needs and complaints being heard. So from Mr. Vogt's, the center's, Trump world's perspective, that sort of engagement by CRS was viewed as, quote, woke and weaponized because they view CRS as using the federal power to give additional unwarranted privilege to voices that belong to minority groups of different sorts, not recognizing that what we were doing was trying to, in many ways, to use that playing field metaphor, sort of make an equal playing field for folks to really have their voices be heard. So that's really this is really part of a fundamental view of what kind of society do we want in America and how do you want voices to be heard. And they view agencies such as CRS and many others as uh, uh, as those that are giving unnecessary, unwarranted power to minority groups.
Yeah, and yeah, you might have said it, but to quote some language from one of the documents from that center that Bo created, quote unquote, CRS tearing apart the civil fabric necessary for a constitutional republic to survive. And um, then Republican lawmakers in 2024 invoking that narrative to argue that CRS was quote unquote used by the Biden administration to push its woke gender and CRT ideologies. And I do think I do think it's worth pausing and reflecting on just the systematic inability and failure of many folks, on from the center to the left, to defend these sorts of programs with the same vigor that they were attacked and caricatured and distorted. I mean, we have a central government that is currently occupying democratic cities, generally cities that have significant uh, populations of communities of color, that are daily snatching people off the street, that are killing fishermen in the Caribbean, um, literally tearing apart the civil fabric necessary for a constitutional republic to survive. Literally, not metaphorically, literally, um, and metaphorically. But um, the ease with which Vote Center and the broader network and ecosystem of right-wing think tanks and pundits and media were able to just disparage the most modest efforts for community healing, and then, the inability to respond and be like, well, if this is woke gender and CRT ideology, you know what we need? We need more of this. And so, yeah, I get just as you were laying out sort of how sort of modest and common sense CRS's work is, and then the way in which it's disparaged because because it is committed to equity in the sense of ensuring that everyone's voice is heard and everyone's dignity is respected. Because that is what the current regime did not like, was the fact that it was, this very modest um, intervention. All right, so that's the backdrop. Then could you bring us up to speed a little bit? Maybe tell us a little bit more about sort of this year, how like how big was CRS in January? Did you have offices across the country? Was there one office? How many staff? And then now, is there anyone left? Or is there is there a closet with one person? Like, where are we?
At the beginning of the year on inauguration day, we had 57 employees throughout the country and 30 offices plus the headquarters office. And throughout 2024, we had done some really active hiring because earlier uh, we were at in the high 30s, but throughout 2024, we increased our numbers. Uh, and so we were at 57 and 31 offices, including HQ office. On March 25, the Deputy Attorney General issued a memo stating that CRS is to be eliminated. It was couched as a proposal, but starting April 1st, there was the first of weekly meetings to effectuate the elimination, quote, proposal for CRS without any explanation once again. If Mr. Vogt's statements from the time when he was out of government were indeed the rationale for elimination of CRS, and it appears to be, it's profound misunderstanding of CRS's work, as you mentioned just now.
And is this lawful? Like, does, some agency or some employee in the federal government have the ability to just dismiss employees of CRS?
I do not believe the elimination of CRS was lawful for at least a couple of reasons. One is that the Civil Rights Act created CRS as a separate service, initially within the Commerce Department, and it was placed within DOJ as a separate unit. And it cannot be destroyed, abolished without congressional approval. And yet, the Department of Justice has taken 57 employee or agency with 31 offices throughout the country down to zero as of October 31st. Uh,
Zero.
Zero. zero. There was one employee designated uh, to fulfill the what they call the minimum function of CRS from a different office called the Executive Office for United States Attorneys, which is the administrative office that works with all the U.S. attorneys' offices. And out of that office, this one person is supposed to be purportedly fulfilling all of the functions of CRS, which uh, we'll talk about the lawsuit that is related to with this, but as the lawsuit is alleging, I believe rightly, that that is the same as arguably worse than elimination. And it is indeed elimination in really every way. So throughout this year, between March and September, there was methodical closure of all our offices. And it is a process that I did oversee. It is something that uh, happened with most of the employees leaving for various reasons until those who remained, the 15 of us,
And do you mind
received.
if I just ask
Yeah.
sort of a question that always comes? So when offices are closed, does that mean there's physical space and a lease, and you get some memo saying you have to kick everyone out of the space and cancel the lease and clear it all out? I just, at a sort of concrete level, what is happening?
Yes, we're talking about, for most of them, actual leased offices. Now, we had some of our folks working in having an office within another DOJ agency, such as U.S. attorneys' offices. And uh, there were a very small number who were allowed to do telework. But for the most part, we had actual physical spaces that we released. And I myself traveled to Houston, to Seattle, to Chicago, to San Francisco, and also, of course, in DC, actively throwing 60 years of history away uh, because we had to discard, of course, we kept what was lawfully, legally required to be kept, but for the most part, we were discarding what was there in those spaces and turning them back over to General Services Administration or to landlords. And so it was literal physical move out over the course of about 100-day period.
Do you mind if I just ask how that felt? Or if maybe you're still processing it, but that's a lot.
It was a lot. I uh, It was painful. Now, as I mentioned earlier, my history with CRS is not very long. I had been a longtime fan of CRS, but I didn't really join CRS until January 2024. So my overall history with CRS at this point is not even 2 years fully. But I saw evidence of 6 decades of CRS work in those communities. And we're talking about old Rolodexes that are still there. Probably very few of the numbers are actually current anymore, but you see scribbled notes by conciliators, conflict resolution specialists, leaders of communities. You see letters of appreciation sent by various communities, organizations. All of that, it was just there with, of course, with old refrigerators and old microwaves, and just you see, these were in many ways lived spaces for decades, uh, lived in the sense of how many generations of conciliators use that space, and that was the platform from which they served their communities in various conflict resolution situations. So it was painful, and I know others have expressed similar expressions of pain and anguish in needing to go through that process. So by September, we had closed the last office, and the last two offices were the ones that I closed, Seattle and San Francisco. And we turned over our headquarters space back to DOJ. And on the 29th of September, 14 out of the 15 remaining employees received what's called RIF notices, reduction in force RIF notices, notifying us that we will be terminated from the department because our positions were being abolished effective October 31st of 2025. And the one person that I mentioned was to go to uh, a different agency, Executive Office for U.S. Attorneys, and work from there.
And so where are we now?
Where we are now is that they did go ahead and close the agency. There was a uh, you know, last minute effort, if you will, by a group of community and civil rights organizations that brought a lawsuit against DOJ for the withdrawal and cessation of services that CRS, had been providing, but no longer was providing. These 11 organizations from different parts of the country, including in your neck of the woods, in Boston or in Western Massachusetts and Connecticut, they filed a lawsuit to prevent the closure of CRS and reverse and preserve CRS, from being closed. And the initial filing was on the 24th of October with a request that the judge in Boston issue a temporary restraining order. The judge did not grant a restraining order, but did say that the
Was
plaintiffs.
that during the shutdown?
This was during the shutdown, and that was one reason that because there was already a shutdown and already a cessation of services, there would not, from the judge's view, there was no imminent harm because the harm had already occurred and employees would not be able to suddenly return and start serving the community groups. And so no restraining order, but now where the federal government is back from the shutdown, and there's a preliminary injunction motion that the plaintiffs filed, and DOJ needs to be responding to that, and I believe will be later today, actually, and we'll see how the judge rules. We are, as I mentioned, in Boston federal court.
That is quite the catch-22, just with respect to the request for a temporary restraining order based on an allegation that a agency has been unlawfully dismantled. And because there is a government shutdown, in part because the Trump administration and allies in Congress are, trying to harm community, there's not available relief. So, and I didn't put, I don't think I put it in, the most elegant way, but there's just something grotesque about, and it's a judge who I think is probably, by the law, it's a rational ruling, but just the context to be in sort of that sort of place. So I don't know, maybe you have a different sort of reflection on it.
Uh, that gets us into sort of the weeds of the ruling. So I'll just sort of stay at the high
Okay.
level
Yeah.
in that. Yeah, I was disappointed by the ruling that not getting TRO because the reason why the complaint was filed and the TRO motion was filed on the 24th was to prevent the closure on the 31st, and that did not happen. And
Mm,
so the
yeah.
employees got fired on the 31st. And some of them may now be looking for other jobs because there's so much uncertainty. And even if the judge were to return CRS, how many would actually be able to return? So there's a lot of practical issues that come with not getting
Yeah.
TRO. So I am disappointed. Uh, but I understand the judge's ruling as to the legal reasoning there. And I'm hopeful that the preliminary injunction request that is now before the judge will be granted. That's my hope, and I hope it happens in the next month or so by January.
So we only have about 5 or 10 minutes left to chat, and I want to turn to, where we go from here. But first, one thought, and then a question for listeners who might be interested in learning more about this litigation. And just the thought is reflecting on just what you just said about how the act of shuttering the office, even if it is in some abstract sense temporary, because maybe an injunction is issued some months out, that even that temporary sort of shuttering can do irreparable harm. because you have people who need to support their families, who have dependents, parents, kids, others. Um, and when you have these ongoing relationships, you can't necessarily pause and then pick it back up. And so, I mean, it makes me think about all of the illegal funding revocations in the higher education context and the irreparable harm that that has done to scholars, to research, to everyone who benefits from it, because there has just been so much systematic just carnage within in the infrastructure that supports all of this, that even if we get to some place in 2028 or 2026 when there is a realignment of just the parties that are ruling in Washington, you can't just turn the faucet back on. Um, and so that's real. And so I appreciate you raising that. And so certainly feel free to respond to that. But then also for anyone who's interested in the litigation, wants to learn more about CRS, or maybe even support the communities or community organizations that have been working with CRS. So like I'm curious, you had mentioned Western Massachusetts. Who is the group there? But yeah, how can folks learn more about all this?
I would point to two websites. First, the CRS website, which is still up. We don't know how long it will be up, but it's still up at
I'm checking right now. Let's see if it's still up.
justice.gov/CRS. It should still be up. I checked this morning. And the other website is one that I'm involved with, which is the website for CRS Restoration Project. And the address for that is America's Peacemakers, plural, americaspeacemakers.com. America's Peacemaker is actually a nickname for CRS that has long been attached to CRS because that is really the work that we are doing under the statutory command to provide facilitate peaceful relations in communities. And so that's the role that we've had, and that's a name that we've proudly held. And that website has information about the litigation and ways that folks can support. One way, of course, is to let your members of Congress know as to how you feel about the closure and the need for CRS in your communities. As you will see there, there's been quite a few robust, thankfully, expressions of support by members of Congress, community groups. On December 5, there were two amicus briefs submitted in the litigation, one by 90 members of Congress, many of them part of the Congressional Equality Caucus, expressing their support for CRS and highlighting the illegality of the closure of CRS. And the other amicus brief was by 102 civil rights organizations, led by the Leadership Conference for Civil and Human Rights, which played a significant role throughout the civil rights movement, as you and many of the listeners know. And I was very happy to see the Leadership Conference lead that group of 102 civil rights organizations in support of CRS and highlighting the work that CRS had been doing in LGBTQ communities, religious communities, persons with disabilities, and police community relations and schools. And so seeing those, we're hoping that having shown through these amicus briefs the real life impact of CRS, that there will be persuasive value. You will see the names of the organizations that are listed there as plaintiffs and as the amici for that brief. In the short run, I'm hoping that as part of the government's year-long funding that is still being voted between now and the end of January, when there could be another shutdown, and I'm sure across the board everyone is hoping for no shutdown. And when the Justice Department's budget is passed, it will choose the Senate version and not the House version. The House version has zero following the orders from the White House. But the Senate version, which is still a Republican majority, has the funding bill that passed the Appropriations Committee, which provides for $22 million for CRS, which is only 2 million less than the current level. And so there's a lot that can be done with 22 million just based on what we were able to do with 24. So I'm hoping that that funding happens, and I would encourage everyone to communicate your support if you do support CRS with your members of Congress, uh, to let them know that they should not just blindly adhere to the demands of the White House and exercise the preeminent role and power of Congress. There's a reason why Congress is Article 1. There's a reason why the Congress has even the firing power of the president. So in that sense, it is the preeminent uh, branch, and that they exercise their role and power in doing what is right by the American societies by passing that funding bill for CRS, which I hope will lead to restoration and um, preservation of CRS. Now, the big question is, will the White House and DOJ follow that fresh expression of Congress, which presumably President Trump will sign? It's an open question. And if the administration does not follow the law, then I think there will need to be additional action to take them to task, under the law. And so that's going to be really the next chapter as to how things unfold. But for now, we're hoping that the judge will make the ruling to restore CRS, and Congress will also pass the legislation to fund CRS, and so that the congressional intent under the Civil Rights Act is maintained and the services are provided to the American people.
Thanks for all that. And we'll post to those websites when we put up the episode so that it's easy for people to dig in. I think it's a certainty that the Trump administration will continue to violate the law across domains. I hope uh, it does not happen here, but uh, I think it would be naive. I think generously, one could say it'd be naive to think the Trump administration will have the New Year's resolution of following the law. I want to flag, so I pulled up the CRS web page, and it's still here. It still, opens with for over 60 years. CRS has been America's peacemaker. CRS responds to communities experiencing conflict and violence to help restore peaceful relations. That does seem to contradict the, animating spirit of a regime that is, again, all about brutality and domination. And a theme that often comes up in this podcast is in not a kumbaya sense, but just like a very sort of nuts and bolts sort of politics and power sense. Solidarity matters, in part because the rigid racial and gender hierarchies that this administration is trying to resurrect culturally and in law harms pretty much all of us. And so I just want to flag on the CRS webpage three initiatives that are highlighted here that are under attack by the Trump administration's assault. And I guess three initiatives that, in the eyes of Russell Vogt, constitute, quote unquote, woke, woke, woke. We'll just say it three times. Um,
Okay.
and so the first is a new training program to build relationships with Arab American communities. The third is publication, a guide for navigating campus conflict. And the third is an educational program to counter anti-Semitism. And another theme that we've talked about on the show is how um, these sort of manifestations of bias and bigotry are sort of never siloed, but always interacting. And so it, makes sense conceptually, analytically, programmatically to have initiatives that are both tackling these things, but also in ways that are in conversation with each other. So, with all that, I want to invite you back in, maybe to share any other thoughts about where we're headed, where we should head, where we shouldn't head. Yeah, just to close us out.
Yes, I want to acknowledge that what I've described as to what CRS has been doing, for many of your listeners, perhaps may seem too timid or too small or not sufficiently uh, uh, bold and imaginative as to how we bring about a more equitable uh, society, more inclusive society. The As envisioned by the originating statute that I've mentioned, the Civil Rights Act, and as a functioning civil rights conflict resolution arm of DOJ and the federal government, CRS's role has been to help other agencies and various communities of US uh, engage with interactions with each other with understanding and with empathy that comes from understanding. And it's a rather modest proposition, and that ultimately you decide from CRS's perspective. We're telling communities, you decide what you want to do with the information. But our role is to make sure that you listen to various experiences of various communities, only if you would want to actually listen to us. But we've experienced over these 60 years that that very modest approach has also been a very powerful one, because we're not coming with prosecutorial powers. We have none. We're not coming with investigative. We never investigate. We're not trying to enforce anything. We have no such authority. But we're here to, as a neutral, uninvested party, except in conversation, we're trying to help you guys listen to each other in a way that avoids future conflicts, in a way that avoids unnecessary expenses, in a way that avoids violence. And uh, surprisingly, perhaps to some, it's been a very effective way of avoiding violence, addressing these mass casualty events that could have taken place. Last summer I was in Milwaukee and Chicago during the national conventions that uh, for the political parties, and I was either with law enforcement or on the street uh, doing de-escalation of uh, conflicts that were happening on the street between protesters and between protesters and law enforcement. And that was the kind of work that we have done over the last 60 plus years of engaging with communities and points of conflict in a way that avoids violence and avoids additional confrontation. And I just find it incredibly sad and disturbing that a president who, in his inaugural address on January 20th, 2025, said, "I want my legacy to be as a peacemaker and as a unifier." Now, not many people took that seriously, I recognize. Uh, but what we are seeing is that peace and unity is being pursued uh, only at the expense of, uh, from the perspective of compliance. And that's really been the tragic mode for creating peace, so to speak, or unity by this administration, by force, by violence, and compliance. And that's completely against the spirit of CRS, which I believe is needed even more today.
So, thank you. As you were talking, I felt something, quite poignantly, acutely. I don't know what the right word is. When you're describing CRS intervening in order to, in this conciliatory role. And yeah, as you said, I think many listeners, rightly could sort of critique an agency that exists within a broader agency that has done like many harmful things. Um, uh, but the thing that I was thinking about was when students across the country were protesting on their campuses because they were angry. at the ways in which they saw their campuses complicit in what they understood as deep injustice, sort of the beginnings of genocidal conduct. And rather than treat their students, with respect and dignity, rather than call in CRS, they pulled a Trump. They called in the guns and they beat up their students and they criminalized their conduct and they expelled them. And that's not to take away from the brutality of, the current Trump administration, but there's just a troubling continuity between the disregard that the Trump administration shows to those who lack formal power, and are trying to speak out and to protest, and how university leaders and many Democratic officials um, demeaned, arguably dehumanized, yeah, and just violently responded to their students. When it could have called CRS.
So there's a lot that I can talk about that, but one of the uh, things that I cannot do is break the confidentiality requirement that is part of the Civil Rights Act that is given to CRS. But I wish CRS could have engaged more. There were calls for CRS's involvement that, for political and other reasons, we were unable to provide responses to. There are locations, less known locations, campuses where we did engage, and I hope one day we will be able to tell some modest stories of modest successes of students and administrators and law enforcement being able to allow for First Amendment expression and finding a workable way forward, even if not fully satisfying for students and others. But to your larger point, the desire for using force and law enforcement to come to a resolution is not just on one party, one administration. It is really across the board that we see. And although generally, CRS had friendly support from Democratic administrations, there's been times, as an example that you're mentioning, in 2024, there's been times, even during that time, that we were not able to do the work that we would have liked to and we were called to do. So, these are lessons that we have learned, and I hope that future administrations will do much, much better.
Thank you. Any final thoughts?
I think I've given too many final thoughts.
All right. Thank you for joining. In a hard year, it's been a real pleasure and joy to get to chat a little bit.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for allowing me to share a little bit of CRS. I hope that I hope that there will be, whether or not CRS exists as an agency within this administration or in the future, that I hope that the principles and the work of CRS will continue in various ways, whether it's state, local, or otherwise. I'll leave it at that.